All right, Nick. Las Vegas Raiders, they are in the AFC West, which has become a bloodbath of pass rushers. And in order to keep your quarterback safe, Derek Carr, who is the future of the franchise so far, you got to build an offensive line around him. And I think that the Raiders have brought in a lot of guys, whether it's veterans or rookies, and surrounded Carr with a group of guys that would be substantially better than the offensive line he had last year. And we even have a couple of stories of the performance of these guys this past weekend. But Nick, we got to ask the Raiders fans, what do you think the biggest upgrade to this offensive line has been? Is it one of the rookies that you brought in? Is it the veterans you brought in? Do you think this offensive line is upgraded enough? Do they need to do a little bit more work to it? Let us know in the comments below. But Nick, what do you have on the Raiders?
Yeah, so the Raiders brain trust definitely thinks they need to do more work to it. This is according to the heavy.com. The biggest talking point coming out of week one for the Las Vegas Raiders involves the offensive line. While quarterback Derek Carr deserves a fair share of the blame for some poor decisions, he was consistently under pressure and sacked 6 times. It's not easy to find difference-making offensive linemen at this point in the season, but the team has decided to add some depth. According to Jeremy Fowler of ESPN, the Raiders are signing Billy Price to the practice squad. Price is primarily a center, but has some experience playing guard when he was at Ohio State. He originally came to the NFL as a first-round pick of the Cincinnati Bengals in the 2018 NFL Draft. He was last played for the New York Giants, where he started 15 games last season. He allowed 2 sacks and 24 pressures, which is good, not great. Adding Price shouldn't come as too much of a surprise because starting center Andre James had to leave in an ambulance after week 1 due to a concussion. His status remains unclear for week 2, but head coach Josh McDaniels revealed that the center is back with the team. So obviously the injury to James and with an offensive line that already had some issues, obviously moving off of Leatherwood, there's some concerns there. What's going to go on? Bringing in Billy Price to add depth, whether at center or guard, is big, especially with the concussion to James. But the Raiders weren't done there. The actual worked out a name a lot of Raiders fans will remember. According to Raiders Wire, as part of USA Today, Marcus Mosher reported that Kelechi Osemele, it's a name I'm sure Raiders fans are very familiar with, was worked out by the Raiders, a former Pro Bowl offensive lineman with then Oakland, now Las Vegas, to potentially come into the fold depending on how he looks. I know he was recovering some injuries and things like that. So obviously the Raiders offensive line, big issue against the Chargers. They gave up 6 sacks. Khalil Mack had a field day. They need to find a way to regroup and rebuild that offensive lineman quickly, right? They can't sit around and wait. Like you said, the AFC West is a bloodbath. They can't just hope people get healthy. They're far behind. So I think what they're doing is smart. Granted, it's only so much you can do because there's only so many people available. But the idea they're not sitting pat and trying to make whatever moves they can, I think is a really good move by McDaniels and his brain trust.
Yeah, when you look at what Khalil Mack was able to do in this last game, you want to protect Derek Carr at all costs because guys are coming off the edge like no one's business. And one move I do like is I like Kelechi Osemele. He played for a few years in Baltimore, and he's pretty solid as a guy that can come and fill in, take reps. And if you need him to be a starter, he can be serviceable as a starter. So I think this is a pretty solid veteran move. But this guy, Dylan Parham, in his first full game coming out of the draft, out of Memphis, he was surprisingly really solid for a third round guy. He graded very well, 82 overall. He had a 73 in the pass blocking game, which is pretty solid, but he was absolutely phenomenal in the run blocking game and 82.6 overall. So, very high marks for a rookie in his very first game in the NFL. So, I mean, Nick, when you look at guys like Parham, you're bringing it in, it's got to give you a little bit of hope that the Raiders know what they're looking for because obviously they brought in this young guy. They see a lot of talent out of him. Obviously, Memphis had some pretty impressive offensive linemen. Darian Kennard came out of there as well. It was a solid group overall. But what do you think of Parham's performance in the very first game?
So he gritted out well, and to your point, he did run block pretty well. But I think what the Raiders are really doing here is they recognized, and you saw it earlier when they got rid of the Leatherwood, that this offensive line, what they came into the season with, what they started game one against the Chargers, is not going to be what their offensive lineman is going to be at the end of the year. They're trying to figure that out. And that's one of the challenges when you go through a preseason and a training camp where it's not nearly as competitive. Starters don't play as much. The other team doesn't play as starters. Holdouts, things like that. There's a lot less padded practice. It's really hard to figure out what are my core 5 guys up front, because if you're not hitting, it's really hard to grade offensive linemen, obviously. So I think that's the Raiders came into this game. Obviously, they moved some pieces around. James got hurt. Now they're adding some people off the street, potentially bringing back former veterans that have potentially retired to come into the fold, a guy like Osemele. So I think the Raiders are recognize that they have issues there. Now there are bright spots. Parham evidently played well, which is a good thing, but it takes an entire cohesive group. And right now they're still trying to figure that out. And there's going to be some bumps along the road, Raiders fans. Obviously, there's going to be challenges as they move guys in and out and try and get that unit playing together. But if they can figure this out, they have all the other pieces. Derek Carr is the right trigger man. They have all the skill guys in place. Their defense is good enough. They held the Chargers to 24 points in LA. That's a hard to do with a Justin Herbert-led offense. 100%, no doubt there. So they're good enough to win and compete in this AFC West, who, by the way, we just saw with the Denver Broncos. The Broncos aren't world beaters yet with Russell Wilson. Chiefs look good, but the Broncos are not there yet. So this division is very open for the Raiders. They just have to make sure they figure out this offensive line, their starting five, and they need to figure it out quickly.
And I'm going to leave you with this final stat on Parham, Nick. So he has no sacks allowed, no hits allowed, no pressures allowed, but better yet, and for the Alex Leatherwood haters out there, this is a big one, no penalties. So he's off to a very good start with the Raiders.